Hi, Academy. I hope you guys are doing well. Certainly missing seeing you guys, us one in class and seeing what everybody's up to and talking to you guys. I hope everybody's doing fantastic. I know you guys are doing a really good job of getting all your stuff turned in and getting to work and checking everything out that you need to do. Really proud of you all. So basically, guys, we're going to look through and see what we can do as far as talking about the week 2 work with the Jacobites. Okay, so as we go through, we do need to speak a little bit about different expectations. So basically, we've got 4 weekly PowerPoints. So there's tasks within the PowerPoints. This week's are due. This video applies to Monday through Friday, the 1st of May. But if you fall behind, it's absolutely fine. And we're here to help. Make sure you get in touch or post on Teams, message your teachers. There's different teachers and duty and stuff like that, and we can help answer your questions. All right. So also do the self-evaluation at the end of the unit. I know you're probably looking at it and you're trying to figure out like, I've just done all this work. Now this is something that's going to help you learn how you learn and figure out what works for you and what doesn't. And that's something to bring an extra level into what we're doing as we move forward. The final task 4 in each PowerPoint is the one that's going to be getting submitted to your teachers for feedback. A lot of you guys did a really good job getting that done with your reports last week. We really want to see your learning diary also, so we can kind of see where you're at, but that won't be getting feedback. That's something that you just basically can work on for yourselves, and it's really good if you're able to get that done. Lastly, with the nature of how we're learning just now, you guys are taking quite a lot of responsibility for your own learning, and that's really important that you engage with this home learning. And it's going to help you to be more independent as you move through with your schooling. And if you are having issues with home learning, or anyone else is having problems accessing the files and stuff, make sure you contact your teacher. We also have the NS Academy social subject site, so that's aasocialsubjects.weebly.com, and you can go there. If you're just struggling to get into Teams and see stuff, you can do that there. Okay, right. So we also need to take a quick moment to talk about should and could. So should is what the minimum recommended task that we're asking you guys to do. The could, that's where you're getting into what you could be doing on top of the should task. They're extra tasks. And if you want to complete more work. Now, I would encourage all of you guys to try and do as many of the could as you can, because that's just going to help you develop the skills that you need to move forward in secondary school throughout the academy. But the should, we need to make sure we're getting the shoulds done. Make sure that if you do fall a bit behind, contact your teacher, figure out what's going on, and we can figure out what we can do to move forward. Alright, so now we have the Jacobites. Alright, so basically, guys, we talked about the Treaty of the Union, about how Scotland and England came together. So we're going to do a quick recap of that. And this is where we're going to talk about the first part of the Jacobite movement. Right, so the Jacobites part 1, your learning intentions. Alright, we really want you to be able to develop your understanding of the impact group people had on the same development in Scotland. You'll be successful when you can describe why some people supported the Jacobites, because that's really important to figure out why they were able to launch this movement. Create a new piece of text showing the 1715 uprising and explain why this uprising was unsuccessful. So what were some problems that basically led to it being unsuccessful? Okay. Right, so last week is a link if you want to have a quick look at what you guys were looking at last week, and Miss Russell was doing the voiceovers. These are reasons for and against having the Union. If you want to see the impact on the Union from Scotland from 1707 to 1715 and do a little bit of a recap, watch the clip there, just click on it. And this week's PowerPoint will cover the impact of the Treaty Union on the role of choosing who would be the next monarch of the UK. We saw whenever we had Alexander, King Alexander was died on his horse, and he didn't have any direct heirs, and the problems that that caused. And we're going to kind of run into that again. I'm going to spoil a question I'll have for you a little bit later on. So we're going to start looking at their attempt, the Jacobites' attempt in 1715 to restore the Stuart line after it changed. A link back to last lesson. So we had the Glorious Revolution, and in the Glorious Revolution of 1688, King James VII of Scotland and the second were forced to flee of England to France because he was unpopular. He was unpopular for two reasons. So the first reason is he tried to rule the countries without help from Scottish and English parliaments. His religion was Catholic, which most Scots and English were Protestant, and that created a problem. And after King James fled to France, the Scottish and English parliaments decided that he had given up the throne. When he left the country, they felt he gave up the throne, but King James didn't agree with this at all. But because he was in France, there wasn't much he could do about it. Parliaments then asked James's daughter Mary and her Dutch husband William, who was the ruler of Holland, who was William the Orange, to be the next king and queen. And they both believed in the Protestant religion, and that's something that they found was really, really important. So, William Mary's reign, so unfortunately it didn't last incredibly long. So William and Mary took the British throne in 1689. They didn't have any children, and in 1694 Mary died of smallpox, and that left William to rule on his own until he died in 1702. All right, so we have a problem. They didn't have any kids. So if we think back to Rota 1, what sort of problems does this take? And that brings us to our first task. So you should read through the information on the next few slides and complete the fill in the blanks task at the end of this information, which summarizes. That's the one you need to do. If you want to do something extra, you could complete an additional family tree task. So you can build onto it and build your own family tree. So let's look at where we're at. So this is where you would want to, once again, if you're doing your code, you can have a look at the House Stuart Orange family tree and see if you can explain part of it to someone you live with. That could be something where if you're like, hey, do you know why all of this kind of played out? And you can try and explain it to them, and that's something that will help you get a better understanding. So if you look, these are the different monarchs and stuff that were ruling throughout the Stuart and Orange family tree. And as you go through, you see so we have William and Mary along here at the bottom, and yeah, so William ruled for 1689 to 1702, and Mary from 1689 to 1694. But because they had no kids, you have to make the decision. You have to figure out who is going to be the next monarch of the United Kingdom. All right, so there's a couple of different players who you could look at. All right, so the main areas we're looking at, we have George the First, and we also have Anne. Okay, right. So what happened? So the throne went to Mary's sister. Anne was the Queen of England in Scotland and Ireland between March from 1702 until 1707. All right, but on the 1st of May in 1707, on the Acts of the Union, she became Queen of Great Britain. So all the Queen of Great Britain and Ireland until she died in 1714. On her death, she had no living heirs, despite being pregnant at least 17 times. All right, so once again, we come back and we have the same problem. The Treaty of the Union became important in deciding what happens next and who ruled the UK. Now, was there something that you can remember about the Treaty of the Union? So what can you remember? What made it a bit more complicated? All right, so you could, on this slide, it's 1714, Queen Anne has just died. So we have William's died, who was married to Mary, she's died, and we have Anne. All right, and we have to figure out who's going to decide who's going to be next in line for the throne. So the names circled are the ones that were previous monarchs, and all of them had died, and you can't choose them. So if you're going to do this and you're going to try and decide, I want you to pause the video and see if you can find who you think should be the person who's next in line to be the king to the next monarch of the United Kingdom. So pause the video, have a wee look, try and figure out who it should be. Now, we know that the Treaty of the Union said that no Catholics could take the throne. So that means that basically Catholic descendants of James II and James VII, the same person, could take the throne. So James the 7th of Scotland, James the 2nd of England, had Protestant descendants though. So the throne could pass to them. The Act also stated that Scotland could not choose a different ruler from England, so they all had to be ruled by the same person. So you could change your answer on the previous slide. So if you go back and you have a wee look, whenever you considered the fact that James Edward Stuart was Catholic, that kind of throws a wrench into the plan. So basically Queen Anne and her half-brother, James Francis Edward Stuart, but he was not allowed to inherit the throne because he's Catholic, and the British throne passed to a distant relative, George of Hanover, from Germany. So it didn't really go to who you think it should have gone to, and it shifted around. So instead of going to Anne's sister's children, James Edward, it went further away from the line, and it was through the Hanover line, and we're looking at George the First. Alright, this is something I really need you to do about some of the things that we've just talked about. Okay, complete the sentence. You need to copy this out or type it and complete them in a word with a word from the box below. So after Mary died, her husband, blank, ruled alone until his death in 1702. So who was Mary's husband? The throne then went to Mary's sister, blank. What was her sister's name? And she ruled until 1714. Anne had a half-brother, James, what was his surname? And his middle name? But he was not allowed to inherit the throne because he was Catholic. Anne's distant relative, blank, inherited the British throne instead. So take a moment, guys, pause the video, and I want you to work through these. So I'll give you a few seconds here to pause the video and copy this down. Alright, pause that. Okay. Right, so many in Scotland and England believed that James should be king. He was the closest relative, he was the son of James VII, and he had a better claim to be king, but because he was Catholic he wasn't allowed. So that's where it gets a bit complicated. He became known as the pretender to the throne, and he got the name from Queen Anne. Queen Anne called him the person who pretends to my throne. His Catholic supporters in Britain were known as followers of James. So followers of James were otherwise known as Jacobites. And in 1715, the Jacobites made a serious effort to restore James Francis Edward Stuart to the British throne. So they really looked at, you could see the problem that started because it shouldn't. It's the whole argument of where it should go after Queen Anne died, and you can see why a lot of people would be upset, because if you were somebody who was really looking after and wanted to keep the same line of descendants ruling the country, you really wouldn't have approved of someone, a distant relative from Hanover. So you're looking, and there was a lot of push that they really wanted to get King James II or 7th into the throne. So a lot of people supported the Jacobites, but the question is why? So one person might say, the gentleman on the left there, that he supported the claim to the throne as a way of protesting the Treaty of the Union. So he didn't like the fact that Scotland and England were joined together. So a lot of people didn't like the Treaty of the Union. So she might support the Stuart claim from the throne because she's Catholic and living in England. So Catholic people, there were still a lot of Catholic people who were living in England, and many Catholics didn't like that George was ruling and felt that it should be James as well. So that's just two reasons. Some other reasons are, an MP thinks that maybe if James Francis Edward Stuart ever became James VIII or III, that he would give him a powerful job because he supported him. So kind of like a bit of bribery there. And I do not like another gentleman down here on the bottom left. I do not like George I. I'm English, and I think he's dull, he's unpopular. I do not approve of the Hanoverian succession, so they don't like the fact that it's not somebody from England or Scotland or British taking over the throne. Instead, I support the Jacobites. And the last one, James Stuart should be king, and even the Pope agrees. So the Pope would obviously support somebody being Catholic on the throne of the United Kingdom as well. Alright, so other reasons why people supported the Jacobites, we have the French support Stuart throne because they really want a Jacobite. If they have a Jacobite uprising in Scotland, it'll distract the British government who are at long war against the French, so it would distract them from fighting the French. King of France and the King of Spain sent money to troops to help the Jacobites, so the French and Spanish governments actually supported it, and plus the Spanish and French support will annoy the English. So that's why some of the people in France would support the Jacobite rebellion. So task 2, what you should do is see what you can remember. There's questions down here, questions 1 through 5, and I want you to try and answer these questions without looking at the past 2 slides. So go over the last 2 slides, complete any questions that you couldn't do before checking the answers on the next slide. So we are going to check the answers. So I'm going to read through the questions, and then, yeah. So number 1, what was James Francis Stuart's nickname? Number 2, how did he get this nickname? Number 3, what did the King of France and Spain do to help the Jacobite cause? Number 4, explain why they would want to do this. And number 5, what are 3 reasons many people supported the Jacobites? Right? You could, an optional task would be turning these into a paragraph when you're answering the question, which could be a wee bit of a challenge for you. But either way, so there's an example there, the Jacobites were supported by many different people. How valid is this view? Okay, answering the question below. The Jacobites were supported by the many different people, and how valid is this view? Would you agree with that or disagree? How valid is it? Valid is a word. You're saying how correct is this, or how justified is this claim? Alright, so I'll give you guys, I want you to go on, pause the video, look through the questions, answer the questions without looking at or rewinding this video or looking at the previous 2 slides. Alright, so pause the video, please. Okay, we're back. So I'm going to go on to the next slide here. So number 1, what was James Francis Stuart's nickname? He was the Pretender. Number 2, how did he get that nickname? Well, Queen Anne called him that because she referred to him as the person who pretends to my throne. Number 3, what did the King of France and Spain do to help the Jacobite cause? They sent money and troops. Number 4, they explained why they did this. They did it to irritate the English, and also they wanted to distract them from fighting wars with them. And then a number of different reasons why people may have supported the Jacobites. They're unhappy with the Act of the Union, and they were protesting it. They were Catholics, and they wanted a Catholic on the throne. MPs supported them and hoped that they would get rewarded. A lot of people didn't like George I and thought he was dull. The Pope supported the Jacobites, so if you're a Catholic, once again, that would give you a much better stance. Who you would prefer. And the French supported the Jacobites because they wanted to try and distract the British government so they couldn't fight them as well. Well, that was the one I said already. Alright, and the last one, they sent help to annoy, to number 3. So the last 2 text answers, number 3, they also wanted to annoy the English, or number 4. Right, so as you go through, so that was the end of part 1. So, develop my understanding and impact the group of people in the development of Scotland. So we've done the first bit, and we can describe why some people supported the Jacobites, create a new piece of text showing that the 1715 uprising, and explain why the uprising was unsuccessful. So now we're going to create a new piece of text is what I'm going to be looking for you guys to do. Alright, you should read through the following slides showing the events surrounding the 1715 Jacobite rebellion and create a new piece of text showing the events surrounding the 1715 Jacobite uprising. It is up to you what you create, but here are some suggestions that you could create. You could create a table, some sort of new piece of text. You're quite free, a timeline, or even, I know you guys enjoyed this a lot whenever you're doing your work on Buddhism, even a comic strip. Complete further research by using the links below. Okay? So here's some, you could also add to your stuff by looking through this fact file and finding information from there and adding it into your piece of text to challenge yourself. This might also be a really good place to supplement some of that, means to add to some of the stuff that you'd already been looking at on the previous slide. So this is some really good information, and it would be a good challenge to try and do that. Alright, so on August 1715, a man not called the Earl of Mar is furious he was denied a top job in George I's government. So he left London, and he was raging, and he went north to try and start a rebellion. He felt George wasn't the person for him. He felt hard done by the way that he was treated by George, and he felt that he was going to move forward and start a Jacobite rebellion to bring in James Edward Francis. So on September 6th, so we're looking at that, and it's just 1 month later, Mar gathers, or not even 1 month, well, just after, gathered an army at Braemar, and he raises the Stuart flag. This means the rebellion against King George had officially begun, and he hoped that the French would support him. But the new French king was not prepared to support the Jacobites. He really wanted to focus on things that were going on at home. So about 8 days later, Mar's Jacobite army, about 10,000 men, moved to take Perth. All right, so they took Perth. September and October 1715. The Duke of Argyll leads a British government army towards Stirling, so the British are having a response, and they hope to stop them from reaching the lowlands. Mar hesitates, and his army, and he splits, and some join with the English Jacobites actually, so some of them join on the other side. So we have the Battle of Preston. One of the things we were looking at was we were trying to figure out sort of in the last unit we did when we were looking at Scottish Wars of Independence is sort of why, who should win when you look at this. Alright, so we look at the tables over here. So on the 9th through the 14th November, there was part of Mar's army, and the English Jacobites reached Preston, and they're unsure what to do next. So the government troops get involved as well. Alright, so on the blue we have the Jacobite forces, which is Sir Thomas Forster, it's the MP. Alright, and so if you look at his numbers, he had 2,000 to 2,500, including 100 cavalry. But then if you look at the Hanoverian, the government forces, and you look at the total number of soldiers they had, a total of 3,000, with 250 of them cavalry, 2,500 dragoons, and 300 plus 300 infantry, so we don't know exactly. So if you look at that and you're trying to figure out who should win, right? And you look there and it says the government troops forced the Jacobites at Preston to surrender on the 13th of November. So if you were thinking the government forces should win, then that probably fits in. So they really wanted to stop the Jacobite movement in England. All right. Then we have the Battle of SHERIFFMUIR. I think I said that right. 13th of November 1715. So 6,000 Jacobite soldiers fight 3,000 government troops. Alright, so we're going to look at that and need to figure out who we think should win this. Alright. So if you look there, 7,000 men for the Jacobite sides with 870 cavalry and 6,200 infantry. Alright, and then the other side, you got 960 dragoons and 2,200 infantry. So if we're looking at this, who do you think should win? So Mar, what happened was Mar hesitated and decided to retreat and wait for James to arrive from aid from south. So basically the battle was indecisive, and the Jacobite forces decided to retreat and wait for France to get involved. And we already know that that was a bit problematic because of what we see with the French king not wanting to get too involved at the moment. So the 22nd of December, delayed by James Stuart, a delayed James Stuart. So finally, in December, this whole thing started in August, arrives in Peterhead from France. He realizes that the situation was hopeless, and he makes an attempt to start a court, set up a court in January, but is quickly disheartened. So 2 months later, a month and a half later, James Stuart and the Earl of Mar escaped to France. James had only been in Scotland for 43 days, so the move to make James to be king, to make him James III of Scotland and James the VIII of Scotland and James III of England, lasted 43 days of him actually being on British soil. So if you look here at this map, you can see the way that the forces went. They moved down to Perth, went into Stirling for a bit, back to Perth, and eventually they escaped from Montrose. Alright. But it wasn't completely done. If you see that advancing smaller Jacobite army still moved down a wee bit. Okay. So task 4. So you need to watch the video clip. It summarizes the 1715 uprising. Okay. Using the video and the slides, this is where you're going to make your new piece of text. You could make a list of all the reasons you can find, which would make you help to explain why the Jacobite uprising was unsuccessful. Alright, so you're going to use the video and explain why the Jacobite uprising was unsuccessful, but you need to make sure that you include as many reasons as possible. So you got the video, you got the slides and different things like that. Now, what you could do is write a paragraph explaining the failure of 1715 uprising, and you could start off your paragraph with the sentence, there are several reasons why the uprising of 1715 was unsuccessful. Remember, should tasks are things that we think you really should be doing, and could tasks would be extra tasks that you can do to challenge yourself. Okay. So I want you to take a moment, pause the video, and so go through and see what you can come up with. Okay? So pause the video. Okay, so we're back. Alright, so the should task, so there's quite a lot that you could have gotten from the video and quite a lot that you could get from the PowerPoint. Yeah, so you need to make a list of all the reasons that you can, which may help explain. So you're making your list, okay? So from the video, you found that Mar spreads rumors about the English to gather support for the Jacobites. 2, Louis VIII died, therefore French support was not guaranteed. That's where we have the new king. Number 3, Mar was not good at planning, and historians criticize him. James didn't want to visit Scone or plan a crowning. James was not a leader. So those are some of the problems. Now, some of the ones that we talked about already. Number 1, the new French king was not prepared to support the Jacobites. Mar split his troops. The English and Scottish Jacobites couldn't agree on the next plan. Mar hesitated. Jacobites were forced to surrender at Preston, and James Edward Francis Stuart's arrival was delayed because of bad weather. So there's a lot of things that kind of went into that. So we've gone through now and we've talked about, I feel like we've quite successfully, if you stuck with me the whole time, you can describe why some people supported the Jacobites. You can also create a text showing the 1715 uprising and explain why this uprising was unsuccessful. Okay? So then you got your self-evaluation and you also have your learning diary. So you'll be successful. How do you feel like you meet all of those? So the sad guy on the left side, all the way up to the really happy guy on the right side, and the guy in the middle is just not sure. So how do you feel you are about being able to answer the success criteria? Alright guys, well I really enjoyed talking through that. Wish I could see you all's faces and we can kind of go back and forth, but maybe seeing me in a little box on the screen might be okay for the meantime, or not. You might not want to see my face, but yeah. So if you have any questions, once again, please contact your teacher, contact the Teams group where somebody's on duty and they'll be able to help you out. But ultimately, Yeah, you guys are doing fantastic. Make sure you keep all your work up. Good job.